This short video gives an overview of Anglo-Saxon government, religion, and learning. You might also be interested in my videos, A Short Timeline of Anglo-Saxon England and Lifestyles of the Anglo-Saxons. The government of Anglo-Saxon England was not a single powerful monarchy. First, England was not under one king until the time of Edward the Elder and his son Aethelstan, who took direct control of Mercia and conquered land formerly held by Vikings. In the early days, after the Anglo-Saxon migration, England had many separate kingdoms and tribes, as you can see on this map. Bede speaks of 7 kingdoms more important than the others, sometimes called the Heptarchy by historians. This grouping is a little artificial. They were not equally powerful, nor did they last the same length of time. Still, this map gives you some idea of the kingdoms in England around the year 800, a few years after the beginning of Viking raids in England. By the time of Alfred, Northumbria and East Anglia were fully under Danish control, and Danes were established in Essex, Kent, and Sussex. Only Wessex and Mercia remained, and Mercia was under a king reportedly installed by Danes. Alfred and his son Edward the Elder successfully fought back the Danes to extend Wessex. King Alfred took the throne as King of Wessex, but called himself King of the Anglo-Saxons before the end of his reign. Alfred and Edward took control of Mercia. Alfred's daughter Ethelfled became Lady of the Mercians with her husband Ethelred, Lord of the Mercians. After her death, Edward would take control of Mercia himself. Edward and his son Aethelstan would then take back the whole of England from the Danes and claim it as one kingdom of England. Nor were the kings of England always succeeded by their eldest sons. In the early times, the throne of Wessex and other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms went to the male relation who proved the strongest or had the most support, as you can see in this diagram. Kings were not all powerful. They could call up the military in war. They could require certain kinds of work be done, particularly the building of roads or fortifications. They were supposed to be the source of ultimate justice, but local lords generally had more control of local justice. We know that the Germanic tribespeople who came to England were not Christian, but we have relatively little evidence for what they did believe. Celtic Christians already lived alongside non-Christian Celts in England before the Germanic people came. Bede tells us that the Celts were not particularly interested in converting the newcomers, with the exception of some women who married Christian kings or lords. Bede attributes the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to the mission of Augustine of Canterbury, as he came to be known, beginning in 597. In reality, surely a combination of Celtic Christians and missionaries contributed to the conversion. Conversion to Christianity was thorough in England, but it did not come all at once. Augustine came to England around 597. Bede considered the people Christianized by the time he wrote in 731. What Christianity meant to different people in Anglo-Saxon England doubtless varied widely, however. Monasteries were important centers of religion and learning. These were places where monks and nuns lived under religious rules that prescribed how and when to do things. They could not marry or own personal property. They spent their time in prayer and work for the monastery. Monasteries stood out on the landscape physically and culturally. They were usually complexes of buildings, occasionally even including stone, at a time when nearly all buildings were in wood. They played key roles in the lives of people living nearby. There were places to attend religious services, and often had burial grounds where one's relations might be buried. There were places with people who could write, and therefore could make records and possessed learning. They were often major landowners, and therefore economically important. Here are remains of St. Paul's Monastery, Jarrow, part of the joint monastery of St. Peter's and St. Paul's at Wearmouth, Jarrow, where Bede lived and worked from the late 7th century until his death in 735. Double monasteries had both men and women, monks and nuns. Sometimes they were ruled by an abbot, sometimes by an abbess. These were powerful and learned men and women. One of the most notable abbesses of the Anglo-Saxon era was Hild of Whitby, a double monastery. So she oversaw a monastery that educated many men and women, including some men who became bishops. When the lay brother Cadman, an employee of the monastery who had not taken monastic vows, told his story of an angel prompting him to sing the first religious poem in English, he was brought to Abbess Hild. She had him taken into the monastery of Whitby and taught scripture so that he could turn it into Old English poetry. He lived the rest of his life at that monastery, though unfortunately, all but his first poem seem to have been lost. Most lay people were illiterate. They couldn't read Latin or English, and they did not know Latin. Note that lay means people who are not in religious life. They're not priests, monks, or nuns. They can be married or single. They may still be very pious. When we speak of religious, we mean nuns and clerics, or clerks, priests, monks, and deacons. Although early in the medieval period some priests married, it was increasingly frowned upon and later specifically banned. Clerics were supposed to know enough Latin to hold church services, which were held in Latin, and they should be able to read and write Latin and English. But not all could. This standard was not always met, and it varied from time to time. Some nuns, however, were highly educated. They wrote in Latin, and they educated others. Not all nuns were this educated. Lack of literacy should not be equated with stupidity or ignorance. Oral culture can be rich and sophisticated in ways hard for many literate people to understand. Popular notions of medieval ignorance are unfair. Let's start with one of the biggest myths, the idea that medieval people all thought the earth was flat. This was not widely accepted. Educated people knew the world was round. Maps depicted a circular earth. I'm limiting images in my videos to images licensed to use and share, so I don't have any Anglo-Saxon depictions, but plenty of English maps show round earths like this one. Kings held orbs and scepters with orb terminals because they represented the world. They are spherical, like the world. We also have literary representations. Bede's De Natura Rerum, on the nature of things, refers to globo terrarum, globe of the earth, and he describes the shape of the earth in more detail in De Temporum Ratione, The Reckoning of Time, chapter 32. The Old English Boethius and Soliloquies assume the earth is a sphere, written a little before 900 or possibly a little after, and Elfrich would pick up Bede's language about the earth 2.5 centuries later. I can only mention the beautiful art produced by the Anglo-Saxons. Many manuscripts have wonderful, clear handwriting. Some had ornate covers, though many have been lost over the years. Illustrations and illuminations in books added to the beauty of the most expensive. I recommend that you start with this URL for the British Library to see some excellent examples. And I close with just one example of Anglo-Saxon sculpture, the 18-foot Rothwell cross, covered with scenes from the Bible and text in runes and in Latin characters, in both Old English from the runes and Latin, the Latin characters. I have only sketched the outlines of Anglo-Saxon government, religion, and learning in this video. I hope you'll fill in more with further reading and watching and looking. Thank you for watching.